if we look at the movements around the world to try and deal with climate change, people like Wangari Maathai, then there's a number of movements by indigenous people in Canada against the tar sands. There's some demonstrations there. In India, Niyangiri and Vedanta, there's a number of demonstrations about the destruction of forests and the big corporate companies in India. There's a fantastic organisation in India called CSE India. In Bangladesh, there's demonstrations around open cast mining. So in so many parts of the world, Bolivia is a fantastic example as well, but in so many parts of the world that really people from the countries that we're from, we are at the forefront globally of pushing for change. And yet in the UK, we seem to be at the back seat, and I think it's time that we move forward into the front seat. Our experience, because of where we're from, gives us that special potential, I think. The project that we did with refugees tells me that as well.
So this thing of addressing climate change and ethnic minorities, one side of it is addressing needs, so that they come to you and say, can you tell us what your experience is, including the experience of not knowing, which is completely disempowering. Yeah? But the other side is releasing contribution, which is recognizing your potential power. And they must recognize that they need you, because the stars of the show are always inside the community, on the ground. You are the most important people. And I talk about building trust and deep listening. For example, our worker here in Manchester, Salim, actually said and represented the needs and said that, well, if you want to involve so many community groups, many of our community groups, my goodness, they only have one worker. You ask them to come to a workshop, they shop their organization for the whole day in order to come. And you need to help them and not just realize this, express it through a real concrete gesture. Pay them to come. Yeah? So although it's not a large amount of money, the reality is something has changed. Some recognition comes forward. And all those good practice things are, when you want a venue to work with the community, find the community venue so that the money goes back into the community.
And there's a whole range of areas I could talk about. I could talk about what we're doing at the Greater Manchester level. We have something called the Greater Manchester Low Carbon Hub, where we've got representatives of DEC. Sir Richard Leese chairs that group, you know, and if you need leadership, it doesn't come any stronger than Sir Richard Leese saying this is an issue we've got to tackle. There are themes of work that we need to deliver across Greater Manchester, including buildings, including energy, including transport, including natural environment, so capital, natural capital as well, all these areas and how we consume things. So we've been talking about direct carbon emissions, but there's a whole issue about embedded carbon and how we consume less to make the need to produce carbon less. And I'll just finish off by just talking about some of the things that I suppose I'm leading on, which again can be really tangible, you know, as well as things like carbon literacy. We've had something called Toasty Loft Insulation Scheme for the last couple of years now, and that's the 10 authorities in Greater Manchester coming together to deliver very cheap, or in most cases free, insulation. You know, our homes in Greater Manchester are some of the leakiest in the UK, some of the most energy inefficient in the UK, and guess what? The UK has some of those energy inefficient homes in Europe. So we've got a problem. We are emitting more carbon from our homes in the UK than in most of Scandinavia, which has got much lower temperatures. So it tells you that we've got to really up our game in relation to this.
So what did we do with the 16 organisations here in Greater Manchester and in the other strands? Well, we ran 3 full-day workshops for the groups, and then we set them 2 challenges to do some work in between the sessions, talking to staff and volunteers about what they were thinking in the workshops, and then doing the same with their beneficiaries, so finding ways to talk to the people that they support in appropriate ways. So you can see there people introduced games, art sessions, chats around tea breaks, just finding ways into the topic to help spread understanding about what climate change could mean for people at an individual level. And then we asked the organisations to reflect on what they had discovered to think through the implications and come up with an action plan for going forward. And through those activities, we reached over 1,000 people. So we worked with 50 organisations altogether, but through all the work that they did with their beneficiaries and their staff and volunteers, there was a massive reach, really. And what were we aiming to achieve? Well, we were hoping that organisations and the people that they worked with would know more about climate impacts, and would be ready to adapt to the impacts that were on the cards, that they'd be more motivated perhaps to reduce carbon to help avoid runaway climate change, and maybe even to think about campaigning on climate change, even though that's not their job. Perhaps having explored what climate change will mean for their core work, they might feel that there's a need for them to be stepping up to be campaigning on this issue.
The phase one really was about 50 interviews. So we interviewed 50 elderly people and 50 refugees and asylum seekers. We then moved on to 2 focus groups with the elderly people and 2 with the refugee asylum seekers. Again, we received a whole host of information from that, and that has all been collated and put into a report that was produced for the first phase. It's still in draft form, so obviously we're not in a position to circulate it yet, but I'm sure it will become public at some point. I think the other key part of this project has been making the strategic links with relevant local organisations like Merki. Now, had we not been involved in this piece of research, there's no way, I know from my organisation's point of view, that we would have engaged with Merki or any other organisation, and with Manchester City Council. So it's brought not only individuals but organisations together to try and tackle this really, really important topic of climate change. And I know as an organisation, the strand of environment work has certainly moved up from being bottom of our work to certainly the middle, and hopefully it will move further up as well. So I feel quite proud to say that. Again, we formed a reference group as well. There's a number of key stakeholders that we've brought together. Atia's she was invited down to a round table. We went down to a conference down in London. So there's been so many opportunities as a result of this project, and I just want to say thank you so much, Kate, again, for allowing us to kind of come onto this platform. But I have to say that this research has put BME communities on the agenda in terms of climate change, but this is literally the beginning. There is so much more work that needs to be done for us to raise awareness amongst our elderly, as well as working on a more strategic level as a conduit with mainstream infrastructure organisations.
Okay, yeah, so this is the toolkit, adapting to climate change, supporting local communities, and it's derived from our findings from phase 1, and this is what we put together. So who's it for? Well, this toolkit's for local communities like us, like yourselves and mine, and our service users as well. What's the purpose? Well, we spoke to, as Tazim said, over 100 people who were worried about the impact of climate change on their lives. And they spoke to us about their worries and their concerns and what they thought they'd need in support. So from that, we've devised this toolkit. And in this toolkit, it's put together in 4 themes. So there's 4 sections within this toolkit. And these are thinking about what we eat, our changing environment, be healthy and happy, and changing climates elsewhere. And these cover some of the issues, what we were told about from the people who we interviewed. And what we've done is we've put together solutions, support and advice in this toolkit, which can help those when they're impacted by changing climate. It can also help the organisations as well.
So these maps were produced by one of my colleagues, and she modeled the climate for the future, especially for Greater Manchester. and it's showing that there is some likelihood that the summers might be, the hottest day in the summer might be even 3 or 6 degrees hotter than they are now, so it may be well into 30, 32 degrees Celsius. So yeah, that's nice and hot. However, the problem is when a heat wave occurs, so we have a hot day, a very warm night that doesn't allow us to actually cool our houses, for example, properly, open the window, it doesn't really get any cooler, and then another hot day. So it means that for some people, especially older people, people with existing health problems, it might be really, really dangerous. On top of that, we have something called the urban heat island effect. All the buildings in our cities are acting a bit like storage heaters that take the heat from the sun, they produce some of their own heat, and they make urban areas much warmer. So for example, in Greater Manchester, the areas in the city centre can be 5 degrees warmer than the suburbs, where there is a lot of trees, a lot of vegetation that's providing this cooling. So there is quite a big difference in temperatures, and of course when you get a heat wave and you live in the city centre, it's like a double burden, and you might be significantly affected.
Thank you very much. I think that's really given us a fantastic local picture on what it means for living in Manchester or Greater Manchester, and some of the things we should be thinking about. The other really good thing Alex has left us is with all this wonderful work that's happening in the city. It's really the start for us in terms of the BME kind of focus on climate change, and I hope that what comes out of this, and certainly what the project team are looking at and the network's looking at, is that we set up some sort of a BME climate change kind of group